I always see simple classic car mods ruined by these common mistakes. How many times have you seen where not having adequate air cleaner clearance, too long of an air cleaner stud, or a big old wing nut has caused paint or body damage? This thing right here is often a problem. I can't tell you how many cars I've seen that come in with a dinger on the bottom of the hood because the air cleaner stud is too long. I'll show you a couple and we'll talk about that real quick. We've got some dogs barking in the background, but I'm out back of the shop and I wanted to show you a hood off a Challenger that's got your classic high spot on it right here where somebody's had too long an air cleaner stud and whacked it. Look right here, and there's another Dodge Challenger hood where you can tell that it's already hit. There's a mark there. This is all torn. I see it all the time. So the fix on this Challenger was to actually get the proper hood for the car. It has a pretty tall intake manifold, so we got the RT hood, which was correct for the car anyways, and you can see how nice and smooth and perfect that is. If you got too long of an air cleaner stud and it puts a high spot or a pimple on there, it's gonna look hideous. So in this case, what we often see is somebody will have, as we said, too tall of an air cleaner stud, too tall of an air cleaner, too tall of an intake, something that's getting our air cleaner stud real close to the hood. Wing nuts don't help because they're pretty tall, so a lot of times if you can run a flat nut or something on there is a beautiful thing. But make sure when you do your hood, you've got ample clearance when you come down and close the hood so it's not going to hit. Another thing to do after you've made sure you have adequate clearance is lock down the stud. On this one we use some Loctite or thread locker to hold it down. You can kind of see there, and I can't turn that stud. Another trick, once you get the perfect length of your stud, is to run a nut down it and clamp it down so it's locked down at the top of the throttle body or the carburetor. I usually use a pinch nut so it can't back off, but what that does is once your air cleaner stud is set at a certain length, it makes sure that it's not going to spin and back out and later hit your hood. Lastly, as you think about your air cleaner stud, make sure that you've got good motor mounts, because if you have a bad driver's side motor mount, when you torque the engine and drive away, the torque load will lift up and this air cleaner will come up and bop the hood. If I had a nickel for every time I've seen an air cleaner stud poke a hole in the hood or put a dent in the hood, I'd probably be rich. Getting these measurements right is so simple but so important, so make sure you take the time to measure your air cleaner and hood clearance. Basically what I'll do is I'll take something laying around the shop. In this case I've got some window butyl. A lot of times you can use bubble gum if your kid has some Play-Doh putty, or even roll up some aluminum foil softly. Put it on top of the air cleaner stud, or whatever you think might be the highest point of your air cleaner, wherever you think you've got clearance issues. In this case I'm going to think it's right there. Then what I can do is gently close the hood down. I'm not going to slam it, I'm actually going to hold the latch mechanism on it. Push it down, lift it back up, and check to see if it got squished down. If you have a lot of clearance, you can use like a big ball of aluminum foil. Ideally an inch would be nice to have that much clearance. If it's indented, I can tell that the hood pushed it down onto the air cleaner stud or the air cleaner, or of course sometimes you'll close it and you open the hood and it's stuck to the hood. Putty's nice because it's soft and it'll leave an indent so you can see if I actually push down on the air cleaner stud. Also, if you had a high spot, you might see that your thing will actually stick to the hood either wherever you had put it. If it sticks to the hood, you know it's coming down. So make sure you have adequate hood clearance. I'll use this GTX as another example. So often when people add AC to their car or have factory AC, they don't upgrade their fan and their shroud. On this car you can see they put a nice fan on here and an aluminum radiator. But most importantly, what I want to look at is the positioning of the AC condenser. See how this condenser, which is really the radiator for the air conditioning, sits really close to the actual radiator so that positive air gets pulled through when idling and going down the highway. What you see a lot of the time is somebody will do an AC conversion and they say that the car doesn't really run that cold at idle or when you're sitting in traffic. Well, what happens is guys will do an AC conversion like this, and you've got all this room here. I can stick my hand in between the AC condenser and the radiator. So what's happening is when the fans are pulling, you're not pulling enough air through this condenser. So what you want to make sure you do is get your condenser as close as you can to the radiator, have a kick-ass fan combo, and also if it sits far away like this, put some foam or build some kind of a shroud so the air goes through. The AC can only work as good as it can pass air through this condenser. That's one of the main keys to your AC system, so don't miss that one. So often I see people will opt to upgrade their steering wheel with a different style, a different look, different feel. One of the things I don't think people take into account when they get their steering wheel is actually the depth of the wheel. This steering wheel right now, luckily I have tilt, feels relatively comfortable, but in my opinion it comes way too far forward towards me. It's very concave. If I had a tape measure, I'm guessing this is about a 5-inch concavity here. And so if I could get a steering wheel that was flatter, that sat more about here, I'd be a little bit more comfortable in the car. I'd have a better feel when I'm driving it instead of kind of having a steering wheel pressed in my face. An example of a nice steering wheel installation and fitment is in this truck. In these trucks, you already have a problem. Corvettes, a lot of these cars where the steering column is already so close to you anyways. So if you're sitting in here, you want that steering wheel as far away from you as you can. This one doesn't have that deep concave. It's probably, what, 2 inches deep. It's pretty close to here, but you can still steer. Very comfortable. So keep in mind steering wheel diameter, certainly grip size in terms of comfort. Keep in mind how deep the steering wheel is and how it fits in comparison with the signals and how you feel ergonomically. Sometimes buy a steering wheel and try it, or talk to somebody, a professional, and see what you can get. But usually if you can look at your original steering wheel and try to figure out how deep it looks visually and then go from there. Think, oh geez, I wish this came out a little bit towards me, it'd be more comfortable, or vice versa, and make your selection with a little bit of information. Don't just guess. Here's another example of a steering wheel and a problem you could have in terms of fit. This steering wheel goes with the car in terms of his modern styling. So despite aesthetic, he's got a small diameter steering wheel, which is comfortable. He's got a tilt column, which is great, but you can't drive the car without hitting this signal. The steering wheel is too close to the signal lever. Additionally, we can't even get the horn cap on here because there's not enough room for the cap to fit. So what this car needs is a thicker steering wheel spacer. So it does have a nice flat steering wheel, but we're gonna have to get a steering wheel adapter that's a little bit thicker in order to get adequate positioning and clearance. Since we're talking steering wheels, you notice I started to lean towards steering columns as well. So steering column selection is also very important. Like we know, most of us modify our cars and don't leave well enough alone, so we add options. If you're adding an option of something like a tilt column, which is great, I try to stay away from the cheap aftermarket columns. This is a cheap Chinese or off-brand column, if you will. And the problem I've got with this one is actually the placement is fine, but if you look at the positioning of these levers, the turn signal points down here way at a weird angle. It should be here at 9 o'clock. It's down here at like 7:30. If I go to adjust my column up and down, right now I've got it oriented where it tilts properly. If I was to turn the column in order to get this index properly at that 9 o'clock position, my steering wheel would tilt like this. So stay away from the cheap aftermarket columns. So back to this Camaro, I'll talk about the column in this car. We know the steering wheel doesn't fit quite right, but with a spacer, we're gonna be great. This actually has a GM column that we had rebuilt for the tilt. So it orients properly. We've got our turn signal levers at the right positioning, hugely important. Another thing when we're dealing with later model cars, when I mean later model, I'm talking like 69 and later, generally something that has a key on the column. I love to use an original column if I can, because they have a nice quality key, lock cylinder, ignition switch. Nothing beats factory in these cases. They've done a lot better job now with I Did It and Flaming River in terms of getting keys that work right. But for the longest time, and you still see it with some of them, you wind up with like a boat key that orients down here. It doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, and if you can do it, just do the homework and get something that fits right. One last thing to consider if you're going to change your steering column is getting the proper fitment in the car. You got to consider length of column to make sure that it's going to sit fore or aft as you need it to. You want to make sure that it's designed for your car so it has a proper way to mount it to the lower dash, or that there's a kit or some way that you can fasten it properly. Additionally, you need to make sure you can fasten it to the firewall properly. And last but not least, you need to make sure that it's going to have the right spline count, coupler, or what have you. If you don't get the right steering coupler combo at the bottom, that steering shaft is going to be a pain to hook up. The column's going to be a pain to install. Just keep it easy and simple. Buy something that fits. You're going to be happy and you'll be cruising down the road. Another thing I see all the time is seats that don't really fit the car. Functionally, visually, aesthetically, any of the above. This seat to me does not look like a seat for a 67 Chevelle. When I climb in, it hits me right in the side. I understand they were trying to get like a nice bolster here. It's comfortable, but it's hard to get in and out of. In addition to that, I want to make sure that my seat will slide forward and back all the way like it should. This particular seat isn't installed properly, so it doesn't slide. It doesn't have the right tracks on it. So it's set in one position. Any aftermarket seat, when installed properly, should slide forward and backwards. So many of these things may sound like my opinion, and they are, but I'm just trying to share some information with you. If you want a race car look, and this is going to be more of a race car seats are fine. If you want the comfort and safety of a modern seat, go for it. But just realize that a lot of the times they're not the right seat for your car, and try to select a seat that's going to be the proper fit. Again, it's up to aesthetics. I feel for this particular car, these seats fit it right in terms of aesthetic and in terms of size. Like, it's a small car. I've got room to get in and out. It's not hugging me too tight. I can slide forward and back as I need to. And look at all that leg room you get. I mean, that's part of the reason to add an aftermarket seat, is so that you can fit in the car more comfortably. I've got room to get to my seat belts. This feels like a good size seat. I'm comfortable. I can drive this car. One other thing that's often overlooked on a simple classic car seat conversion, not just getting the right seats that fit your car, but making sure they're secured properly. Get the right brackets, bolt them down securely in the car. These are brackets for a Chevelle like this, for a bucket seat A-body. We'll weld them in place and put in the proper original seats, convert it from a bench to buckets. Otherwise, they make sliders and adapters that go with almost all types of seats. Most importantly, make sure you get all 4 bolts bolted down securely so the seat is safely fastened in the car. Another common mistake is people don't leave themselves a fail-safe. This truck's all modified with shaved handles, and I'm literally trying to open it right now with the remotes, and it's not opening. If the window's up, how do I get in? In fact, it doesn't even have a handle on it right now. I can't get in. So how do I get in the truck? Luckily, this truck has a button installed under the dash where you can reach in and override it. It has one for each door. But does it have one hidden somewhere else, under the hood, under the truck, or a manual cable? If you don't, you're going to get locked out and you're going to be very, very frustrated. I remember I bought a 70 Chevelle one time that had the engine and transmission taken out of it, and it had no handles, all the windows up. I actually wound up drilling a hole right where I knew the handle was and poke through it to get the door open. I was going to put regular handles on it anyways. Just don't get stuck locked out of your car. Keep it simple. Have a backup. So often when people choose headers, they choose headers that hang too low, that don't fit the car properly, too thin of a flange. There's so many different problems you can have with choosing mediocre quality headers, poorly fitting headers, and the like. I love the horsepower gain from headers, but choose a set that fits. I'll show you these headers and a couple others on different cars to kind of explain what I'm talking about. If you look at this header, this is obviously 2 headers for some small block Chevy sitting here. These flanges are very thin. They're not going to seal very well against your head and get a positive seal. These ones you can also see have been fixed a couple times. The flanges have hit the ground because they don't clear the ground well. Car sat too low, they're all scraped up and bent up. Also, you can see somebody had to whammy them with a hammer in order to clear the steering. Just not the most perfect set of headers you could choose. Surely there must be a set of headers that fit better. Those headers I was just showing you came off of this Camaro. Originally, those headers didn't fit very well at all. So we went with a better set of headers. This set is by Doug's. They've got a nice thick flange, which is so important here because when you tighten all your bolts, you notice you got a nice flange that's going to hold it firmly against the head. When doing that, make sure to get some good bolts. These bolts you can see have a really small head to them, so I can get a wrench on every single bolt and get them tight. A couple header tips. When you first put them on, make sure you tighten them evenly, torque from the inside out, fire the car up, tighten them again. I hear people complain that they don't like headers because they're always blowing gaskets. Retorque them a couple times after heat cycles, and you shouldn't have to do it but every tune-up after that. Make sure you get bolts, like I said, that you can get a positive wrench on and get that thing tight. Also, make sure you use good gaskets. I don't ever use the paper gaskets that come with a stock header. I'll get something like these Felpros that are metal lined, or if I've got a cheaper header or something that I know is a little bit warped, a lot of the times I might go with something like this Remflex. It's very thick, and when you tighten it, it compresses down, tightens around the tube of the header, around the exhaust port on the head, and gives you a positive seal. Additionally, you'll see this car with its new headers, they don't hang too low anymore. I hate knuckle dragger headers. They're too low. You have to straddle over speed bumps. Headers should not be the lowest point on your car, and they shouldn't bottom out on everything. Nothing's more annoying than a set of headers that hangs too low. One other thing that I see commonly overlooked when doing headers is getting your wires protected and safe. If you need to get different plug wires to get a 90-degree end, you can get a flex end, a straight end. Make sure your wires are in some kind of a loom so that they're out of the way. Make sure that they're clear of the header tubes so they don't melt. Burn through a spark plug wire, you're going to get a sputter, the car's not going to run right. You added headers to gain power, guess what? You just lost power. Do it right by following some of the simple tips that I've outlined for you, and please leave some comments down below. I'm curious to see what kind of tips you guys have. We're all looking to learn here.